Hey guys, so what's been happening in the hobby this week? Well, I thought we'd have a little bit of a discussion on, custom schemes for Shatterpoint. So we've talked about this with MCP and other systems, but today I thought we'd go through that and have a bit of fun playing with some colors. It's a new year, so I thought we'd start off with some blue-greens, as I like to do. But these are new colors, so we've got some new ones to play around with, and I thought we'd do that on this Sith Assassin here from the Shatterpoint starter set. I think that'd be really cool. So yeah, we will be exploring other colors this year, but today we're gonna be doing this because I want to explore these two colors here specifically, so that'll be fun. We'll do that on the dress here and the clothing and so on, and just see how we can go bringing a nice little color scheme together that's a little different from what's in Star Wars or on the box art anyway. So yeah, I thought that'd be really fun. So I guess we should get started, eh? Custom schemes on Shatterpoint. Well, it's a little bit like MCP. We've discussed this before with those minis, and I showed you my journey on that one and the final results of the minis that I've painted so far. And, much of this discussion, I guess, follows a similar vein when it comes to these particular minis. And there's a few reasons for that. One, it's made by the same producer, Atomic Mass Games, and it's in a very similar scale, or even the same scale, I think, 54 mil or something like that. So they're slightly larger minis on the same scale as MCP, and or very close to anyway, and a lot of the similarities in terms of the design shapes cross over into both. So a lot of Star Wars design has a bit of a costume feel to it, much like a Marvel mini does, or a Marvel character. Not quite as much as that. We're going to go into some differences on that and to do with like custom schemes in a second that I've noticed between the two as I've been like playing around with this. But there are a lot of similarities, and so that's where we'll begin. So the first thing about it is that much like MCP, these are a great, canvas for you to explore color, and they've just got a lot of large, nice areas where you can play around with blends, etc. And the reason for that, as I've just said, is that they're more of a costume. And for a difference, you might look at something like Lord of the Rings, for instance. The design of those characters is more like a lived-in sort of feeling. There's lots of wear and tear, little knickknacks, and little things that they're carrying, belts and straps and so on. But with Star Wars, you get a more simplified design. Things are cleaner lines, smoother areas, etc. That sort of thing. So it lends itself to exploring color for color's sake, and so that's why I find, and they're a bigger scale. So that's why I find these minis to be good for that purpose. And so as you're watching me paint, well, I'm going through some colors here that aren't necessarily designed actually for the Shatterpoint minis. They're colors that I'm playing around with for other armies. And so I guess that's the first benefit we'll talk about, is that when you do paint these minis, if it isn't your main game and you're using them as like a refresher model like I'm doing here, so it's my in-between projects between larger army projects and so on, I like to use these as a refresher model, as a way to explore color. And that's the where I would begin if I was doing this, because it does take time to build up the sort of the color theory muscles in your mind to be able to freely explore this stuff and find those color schemes. And so I use them in a way to both relax and to test schemes. So these blues and greens that I'm using here, you'll probably see later on other minis as we go through the year. And that's a really great thing to do for yourself personally when you're sitting there, and you might be getting to a point in your, let's say you're doing, you might be doing 40K or Age of Sigmar or now Warhammer the Old World or whatever larger game system you're playing, and you get sort of blocked, or the color scheme starts to get a bit old and you don't feel the love for it, or you want to just inject something new into the scheme or slightly change it up here and there, and that can be really hard to break the mold on that when you're in the middle of a large project. Like, you don't feel like you can then just suddenly start painting something new. So having another model that you can go to and just explore that for its own sake, and not have any real sort of pressure attached to that model or to that collection of models, is really great. Another one, which we might talk in another video on this sort of subject, but Underworld's minis are a great one for this, for that refresher model. I've talked about that before, but with Star Wars particularly, and that larger scale, it's a little bit better for this type of concept. So much like, the MCP set of minis that I did, we're looking at a spectrum of colors. So I'm thinking about the sorts of colors that I want to use over the year for other armies, things like that, and things that I want to explore just, for its own sake. And then I'm putting those into a group of colors, and then I'm going to use those on these minis. And so even though each mini will be a little bit different here and there, overall you'll get a harmonious whole over the collection. So it's a little bit like army painting, but each one will be individual. And I think that's a really great way to attack Shatterpoint or MCP, because you do get a nice harmonious color scheme at the end, even though individually you'll get that separation between colors. So I like that a lot, and I think it's going to be great for Shatterpoint minis. So they're just some of the initial ideas that you can go to begin thinking about it. Now we'll talk about some of the pitfalls of trying this, because there is, as I've just alluded to in terms of design, Star Wars is a very specific sort of design for their characters, a very specific set of colors, and it's one of those IPs or fantasy worlds, sci-fi worlds, that is very strict on, or mostly strict on, its color palette and the types of colors that are used for each of the characters. So that can make it really difficult to break out of that mold and actually find new colors and force yourself into thinking of them in a new way. It is actually really hard with Star Wars. In a slightly different way to something like Warhammer. In 40K or any of the main games, they also have very defined color schemes for their factions. But something about the way in which they're designed, there's a bit more freedom to come up with your own color schemes, and that's got to do with their underlying, I guess, principles of the lore, the way those factions are created. There is a lot of variety in that. Space Marines aren't just one color; they're many. Things like that. It's built into the lore that there are these like variant color schemes, and also just from a collection point of view and the game point of view, it's also encouraged to kind of explore those colors as well. Not in every edition, but generally speaking, over the course of Warhammer's history, their encouragement to do your own schemes has been part of the ecosystem of that hobby for quite a long time. Again, in more or less amounts depending on the edition and who's running Games Workshop at the time, but mostly speaking. But with Star Wars, you do have much more set in stone sort of color schemes, much like Marvel, where Marvel have very strong color palettes for their characters. However, with Marvel, they do explore different costumes. That's actually part of that whole comic world, is that one character doesn't have just one costume, they have many. So there are actually a broader color palette for Marvel characters if you want to explore it. Whereas for Star Wars, there aren't really alternate costuming. They have different periods where characters will wear different things, but those different costumes are still part of a range of costume that has a certain color palette, if you know what I mean. So whatever dress they're wearing, it fits into the Star Wars world. They don't sort of have vastly different colors just randomly, right? So how do you break the mold? How do you get into doing this and looking at them differently, especially if you really love Star Wars or you're really into it? Well, I would say tweaking the color scheme. So just doing a subtle variation is probably the best way to start practicing and getting into different color ideas. You don't have to completely change the color scheme. Even here, what I'm doing is still very similar to the color scheme that this Sith character has. It's very similar. It's a purple blue. Well, I'm just doing blue greens with a purple, or at least some level of that combination, and so you don't have to go super overboard and change it completely. You can keep it within a range that is similar to the character, but just slowly edge it out, so you just get a few other colors that you can play with, and that will just give you a lighter and more I guess exploratory feeling when you go to sit down at the painting table. And I think that's really positive and really healthy. So all of this is building towards a stronger, I guess, color theory or level of tools that you have at your disposal to generate your schemes and make the painting experience fun for you. So techniques, etc., all these different things. And I think that's where the benefits come from. Star Wars has a lot of elements on the models that you can explore, OSL, etc., the lighting from the lightsabers, etc. This sort of thing can be explored if you wish, or you don't have to. It's really up to you. So they do offer some really unique sort of painting ideas and techniques there that aren't always on other models. I think that's really beneficial and positive. So delving into this and breaking the mold from the official color schemes and just stepping away from that and thinking about it differently helps you in a lot of ways. It's not just about Star Wars itself or about these particular minis, but it does then pervade to the rest of your hobby. So all the other miniatures that you paint and collect and so on. So it has broader effects, and that is going to improve overall your hobby experience. I'm a proponent of many flavors. I like to have a few different systems going on, a few different sorts of projects happening, and I like to jump between those. I'll do stages where I'll do one project for a long time, but I like to have those refresher, smaller, bite-sized projects in between and along the way to help keep me invigorated and have that creative process going, because not a linear thing. Your creative journey isn't linear. It has ups and downs and lots of back and forths. All kinds of things go on creatively inside of your mind, and it's hard to have just constant progress or see constant betterment of your skills. You'll find this if you go to the gym or you do exercise. That is also not a linear progression. It has lots of ups and downs, and this is consistent with most things that you learn. And so with creativity, it's important to add in those different. I think about it like seasoning in a stew. You got to add those little bits of spice and seasoning in to just jazz up the pot. And that's what this is doing. This is giving you a chance to explore, and that's really important for creativity. So then finally, one of the other benefits to doing this with Shatterpoint specifically is that, your force or your army or whatever you want to call it is quite small. Much like MCP, it's a small number of miniatures. In fact, with Shatterpoint, it's just 2 box sets, and that's your total force, right? So you've got like 2 little groups with some characters and some support minis and so on, your little troops and all of that. And that's basically it. That's all you need. Of course, you can increase your collection, etc. But for your initial little force, it's actually quite manageable. And if you're getting the starter box set, well, you already have 2 forces that you can play against, and if you expand on it, it's not very much to actually just get something together and start playing. And so that gives you a nice limited number that you can start thinking about those color schemes and not have to paint hundreds of models at a time to work it out, which is really nice. It's a manageable project. It's something that you can have in the background there, mucking around and so on it as you go, and that will just improve everything. So I think that's a really big benefit to this, is that Shatterpoint is very contained, and that helps massively for your learning and getting those little progressive steps, hitting those little milestones. So you do get some feeling of linear progress. That is important. You do have to try to set up little success points where you can meet different goals. They don't have to be massive ones, but you just do these little steps, and that helps to bring you along and find those moments, those aha moments where you go, that's how it works. That's how I do it. That's how I put that wash on. That's how I blend those colors up. That's how I approach painting this way with this brush, etc. And those sort of things build up, and you end up getting a better set of tools, as I said, to work with on your bigger projects, and you'll have more energy and more creative juice in the tank to get those bigger projects done. So I guess finally we'll have a think about maybe some cons. I don't really think there are many cons to this. This sort of thing really only has positive benefits. But I guess, like many things when you're learning something new or you're trying to push yourself, obviously it can be hard, it can be difficult, it can put you into a sort of a paralysis because you can't move forward, those sorts of things. So I guess the main con or the main, negative for this might be that overload of information. I've talked about this before. So, as I said, you don't have to go full tilt and just come up with totally wild color schemes, on every miniature, that sort of thing. You can stick with the main lore color scheme and just change little things here and there and explore small areas. So you might just pick one element on the model and then just explore that, and keep the rest in that lore color scheme so it's easier for you. So you're reducing the mental load. If you have a busy life, if you've got many different obligations and this is a small time you have to sort of relax, then adding in a learning component where you're trying to push your skills may not be appropriate. So I guess the only con is there to think about, your mental load when you get to do this and how often you get to do it, and that will then dictate how much of this sort of idea you can actually take on board. And so that's I guess the main consideration is thinking about your time and how much time that you have to spend on it. And I think that will give you the best answer as to how far of this you would actually push for, you know, how deeply you would go. And it's perfectly fine not to do it at all. You know, that's the other option, is to ignore what I've just said and just go ahead and just paint them in the law color scheme because, you know, you enjoy that, and that's a good way to go. And that's perfectly legitimate and fine. You know, nothing that I've said here is, you know, gospel or you know, you should take every word, that sort of thing. It's just one idea out of many that you could possibly explore. And I urge you to do that. You know, ignoring me and going on a different path is just as legitimate as thinking what I've said is somehow useful to you and you incorporate some of that into your workflow. Both options are just as valid. It's down to you and how you feel about your process, which is going to give you the best results. Because it is a personal journey. Creativity has many paths, and each one is unique. And you have to go down that path yourself. No one can hold your hand. You know, nothing that I say or do in any of these videos is really going to ultimately get you to where you need to go. It's just a source of inspiration, maybe some information, etc., some learning points, but ultimately you have to incorporate what you need to incorporate to move forward and action it, right? And then progress. So those things are all down to yourself. And so yeah, I guess that's the final thing, is just thinking about how much of these sorts of things you want to incorporate, if any at all, and that will give you the best results, I think. So now I think we'll leave it there because, you know, it is still a positive idea, I think, and there's not much cons there to really be had, but it's more just a cautionary thing, just to think about how much of this you want to take on board. But if you do, I'm sure you'll have a great time with it, and it is a lot of fun to explore colors. You know, there's millions of producers of colors out there, and, you know, or sorry, millions of colors of producers that make them, and so on, that you can get your hands on and play, because they're all different. Each brand has its own unique way that it works, and it can just be fun to do, you know, and that's part of the whole process. So we'll leave it on that nice positive note, and we'll take a look at how I've gone here on this Sith and see if I've come up with a color scheme that's interesting and something that maybe I could use further in my process in the future. And there we go, all done. So let's take a look. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's a fun process, just playing with colors and coming up with you know, new schemes and things like that, or testing new paints. This was a really great one for that, because the teal here you're definitely going to see in the future on other videos, so that's pretty cool. And I'm liking the purple and the red contrast, so that's pretty nice. So yeah, but you know, in terms of Shatterpoint minis, this one's pretty fun to paint. It's definitely a good one to start with. If you've got the starter box, this is a nice one to have a go at, because it's got those nice flowing robes there and that sort of thing, and that's a really nice one to you know, try and experiment some techniques on. So yeah, really enjoyed this. I hope the little chat has given you some ideas or got you on the road to thinking about you know, custom schemes on these sorts of minis, because it is a fun thing to do. So yeah, I'm definitely a proponent of it, and you'll hear me talk about it regularly over the time that I do these videos. So it is something to consider, I guess, if you're into this. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this. I'll leave a nice image for this one at the end, as I normally do, and the paint list and so on. But I hope you've enjoyed this. Please hit that like button, subscribe button. It really helps me out. And I guess I'll catch you on the next one.